Hey everybody, Wayne here. In today's overview and review, I'm going to take a look at Midway Solitaire Deluxe Edition, designed by Joseph Miranda and published by Decision Games. This game was originally published in 2017 in World at War magazine issue number 54. That quickly sold out, and they published this deluxe edition this year, 2022. It has a mounted map and thicker counters than the magazine game. Now, Midway Solitaire, despite the name, covers more than just the Battle of Midway. Instead, the game simulates the Japanese operations in the Pacific Theater between April and June of 1942. The AI system handles the Japanese, while you play as the Allies, primarily American forces. The Japanese will be advancing along 4 routes, historically designated as Operation AL, Aleutians, Operation MI, Midway, Operation SO, the Solomons, and Operation MO, Port Moresby. Midway Solitaire uses a fog of war system that keeps you guessing what naval units the Japanese have in their various task forces, while also potentially keeping you from even launching attacks if a task force hasn't been spotted yet. Let's go ahead and do a quick overview. I have a tutorial play and partial playthrough for more of an in-depth look at the game. Definitely in-depth. It's in the first video is over an hour. And then second here, I'll cover my pros and cons, and then we'll go to my final thoughts. All right, now for the quick overview. First off, the map. You can see here the actual play area, the Pacific, with the west coast of the United States over here, and then holding boxes for Japan and different bases over here. It's covered in the middle, half or so of the board. And then the outside here, the other half, here you have different holding boxes and tables. In the game, Midway Solitaire, you are pulling operation markers. So there isn't a traditional turn structure. Instead, you're going to fill this with 22 operation markers. These markers are primarily the markers representing each of the different routes. So for instance, Operation MO, which would activate the Operation Port Moresby MO line, and you would be moving the Japanese task forces there. Or there are special operation markers with special rules. When you pull a marker, you're going to be putting it on that sequence of play track at the top of the map there. You'll be following along with the extended sequence of play. It's very procedural as you follow along. You're activating, like I said, each of these routes. You're moving these task forces. The task force here, there are markers on the board. So you can see, say, for instance, this one, 4th CSF, Carrier Strike Force, here in Truck for the Operation Solomons. Those task force markers represent those holding boxes over there. The holding boxes you can see, all you can see is the Japanese flag on the back side. On the front side is where you're going to get the units, such as TR3, which is troop transports. Or you're going to get maybe DD3, destroyers, etc. These different units are hidden from view. You are playing the Americans, the system's playing the Japanese, they're hidden from view. So until they're spotted, in which case you'll flip them over, then you'll see. When a task force is spotted, you flip over the actual task force marker to spotted, and you go ahead and flip all those over so you can see what that task force is made up of. The holding boxes, as you can see, you have where they start from. You also, over on the American side, you have big boxes here, which are home bases. The Japanese, if they ever advance to adjacent to a home base and then they end the turn there, you automatically lose as they consider to have advanced into that home base. Otherwise, they are moving towards you. You also have, and this is where you'll deal with the Japanese mostly, these green locations. These are the objective spaces or island bases. Aleutians, Midway, the Solomons, and then Port Moresby. The Japanese are going to be trying to take them over. Winning and losing. You win by accruing enough victory points by damaging Japanese units and eliminating them. The Japanese, at the very end of the game, after you're going to go ahead and add up what you've destroyed of them, of their forces, then you're going to subtract VPs the Japanese have earned by destroying your forces and also any objective spaces they control. You're going to compare that to a certain threshold to determine your level of victory or your level of loss. Like I mentioned before, If the forces end up next to one of your home bases at the very end of a turn, they're considered to advance into it, and you suffer a sudden death loss. During the game, while they're advancing, if you cause enough losses to the Japanese in the form of carriers and battleships, you actually have the potential, they're going to have to make a morale check. If they fail it, you can see these markers here that all say advance. You would flip that over to withdraw. They will now move away from their objective to represent, a collapse of morale, a change of operational strategic planning where the, admirals say, okay, never mind, we're pulling our forces back. I didn't cover everything. There's a lot more to the game. I didn't really cover the combat. Actually, let me talk about that real quick. Combat, so the game is, strategic and operational. The combat, though, gets down to this battle display here. So say you have, air forces, naval units, whatever the case may be, when they occupy the same space, there's going to be a battle. Go ahead and put that marker on that location. You're going to then transfer any units down to this battle display. You see the U.S. force, the Imperial Japanese Navy force. They have different roles, cap, escort. Are they attacking the task force, attacking objective? Any naval ships, and then coastal defenses. You're then going to go ahead and resolve combat. Not going to go into combat other than to say that the units are going to be rolling off. You are going to be rolling against numbers on the counters. Same thing as the Japanese. However, you will assign units. So you will go ahead and pick a unit to attack a certain Japanese unit. Japanese will just roll their hits on their units, add them all up, and then assign them based on a attack priority chart that's over here on the board. Again, I know it's very simple, very, covered it, did not go in depth. Go ahead, watch my tutorial playthrough for a full in-depth look at the whole game, how it works, because it's not complex, but obviously you can see there's a lot of components to it. There's a lot of procedures to it. You can see the sequence of play track. Go ahead and watch that video for a more in-depth look at it. Otherwise, let's go on to my pros and cons. All right, let's talk about my pros and cons. As usual, cons first, pros last. First con, despite being a deluxe edition, there is errata. 2 of the Japanese aircraft counters have misprinted numbers. Not a huge deal. There's quite a bit of counters, but just FYI. There is a missing connection line on the map between the West Coast and Pearl Harbor here. There should be one of these solid black lines. And finally, the American Player Aid card. It comes with the game that describes all the American actions. That it also actually has the rules for the special operations markers. It does duplicate the text for Admiral Nagumo's. It uses both on both his spot and under Admiral Yamato. So you have to change some of the routes listed on that. So you either have to change on the player aid, which I copied, I print out or scan and print out extra copies and I write on it. Obviously, if you don't want to write on your player aid, you have to do something like that. So just FYI. And I don't believe there's an updated one to download or anything like that. Second con, the game system, it just doesn't simulate Japanese historical operations perfectly. The way the system works, the Japanese are constantly, they're scouting, they're attempting to spot your task forces. Remember, you flip it over for the spotted side. Once a task force is spotted, and if the various Japanese task force on that route are in range, or if the Japanese forces are in range of one of your objective spaces, such as Midway, the Japanese are going to launch an air attack. This results in really kind of more frequent piecemeal attacks and not 1 or 2 climactic battles along each route. And when you're playing the game, there is no Battle of the Coral Sea. There is no Battle of Midway, right? Instead, it's like Battle of Midway Part 1, Battle of Midway Part 2, Part 3, etc. In addition, and sort of the opposite problem, eventually the Japanese forces, their task forces, they actually move right into the objective spaces. Okay, they are trying to, invade them, right? That was kind of the plan. However, you'll find the Japanese advancing all their task forces, including, say, their carrier strike forces, right up to the shores of the different objective, right up to the shores of Midway. Although I don't usually enjoy increased rules overhead, if I can help it, perhaps some more rules, concerning the use of Japanese air forces and the task force movement, would have been welcome. Third, combat, it's hit or miss, pun intended. Now, I do like how the different aircraft are assigned different missions. I'm going to talk about that briefly. Cap, escort, attacking a task force or an objective. I do like that. But I don't like the asymmetry of it. If you watch my tutorial, you know what I'm talking about in more detail, but I'll explain quick. as the Americans, at the beginning of a battle, you assign your units to a specific target, right? So, certain aircraft are going to attack that Japanese aircraft. Now, that does mean if you put 2 aircraft on one target and that target is destroyed, the second aircraft is effectively wasted, right? Okay, that's fair. I can accept that. However, on the Japanese side, you don't assign their units. Instead, you basically, for every step of the combat, you're rolling for hits on all their units. So if they have 3 units that are eligible for combat in a certain step, you roll for all the hits. However many hits there are, you then assign them by rolling on a table, the IJN attack priority chart. So you go ahead and assign them based on this chart. Again, I'm okay with that. I'm not against either method of combat resolution, but what I don't like is that each side resolves combat differently. I feel what it takes is, in reality, it's a simple combat system. It makes it seem more complex, and it increases the time it takes to resolve each combat. I wish, the designer, Joseph Miranda, had maybe chosen one method and stuck with it for both sides. My personal preference would be just roll for hits. Don't be moving them around trying to assign them. Just roll for all the hits, assign them as you wish, or if you must, have a table like the Japanese do. Maybe even for the Americans, you say, hey, there's a table they have to follow. If those are available, that's who they'll target. I also think that kind of fits more with the strategic operational scale of this game. It's not a tactical game, right? It shouldn't be trying to simulate one. So it doesn't need combat that acts like that. Speaking of the tactical scale battles and the downsides, battles between multiple task forces and their air units become overwhelming very quickly. The primary problem is that all of the combat, from air to naval to land, that's in one spot is resolved at the same time on this same battle board. So you can have, look here, we have multiple task forces. I've had battles where I have 3 task forces fighting my 1 or 2 task forces in the same location. That means you're putting everything on this board. Ships, aircraft, all the different roles they have. So what happens is, after the battle, not only is resolving it difficult and tedious and, you find yourself losing track, but after the battle, sometimes I was unable to remember where each Japanese unit, especially the naval ones, went. Aircraft, thank God, have the names of the carriers they're assigned to on top of them. So it'll say Soryu. Thank God for that. Because when it comes to the regular naval units, I don't know which task force they're part of. I can't remember, right? When there's 8, 9 naval units, by the end of the combat, I'm like, I think this, I think that. So I have to guess. And I think that is, again, it's related to the, putting this, not involved, because it's relatively simple, but just putting this sort of elaborate battle display involved in trying to resolve all of these, operational type battles. What does that mean? I'm not sure if there's an easy solution. I think it may just be, a difficulty that Miranda faced when he was trying to include both strategic and operational play along with the tactical combat system. I just wish it had been done a little differently. Okay. I've said it. I've said multiple cons. Let's get to the pros, because there are pros. First off, the map and counter graphics, errata aside, missing spot here, it's well done. I love seeing the drawings of the aircraft on the counters, right? Seeing the actual sort of aircraft here. I like seeing that. Instead of just like a plain silhouette. Yes, the naval units are silhouettes, but that's okay. But seeing the aircraft, you gotta love that, right? The map also, did a good job with how everything is laid out. The lines are clear. Bases, the objective spaces, they're obvious. Even the water has like a nice textured look to it, so it's not just a big blob of blue color. Second pro, with how gameplay works, how you pull an operations marker and resolve it. The game works extremely well as one that, as long as you leave it set up, you can play, as much or as little in one go as you like. There was times I found myself sitting down before work, playing a single operations marker, drawing, resolving, and I was done. But then other times on my day off, just earlier today, I was playing it, right, for hours. Just pulling markers and playing. Just draw marker after marker, really getting into the game. I love that flexibility, especially in a solitaire game. It also makes the operational aspect of the game, unlike the tactical, easy to manage. Unlike the combat, I never felt overwhelmed, looking at the big picture, whether it's from the Japanese perspective or my own. I know it probably looks overwhelming right now, but really, think of it like this. You draw a marker, it activates a single route, so one of these 4 routes. You go ahead and resolve it, going down the procedural sequence of play, and boom, you're done. On to the next. Draw another marker or call it a day. Excellent operational system. Third pro, combat values on aircraft, generally speaking, they seem accurate. Sometimes to the point of frustration. What I mean by that is, historically, we know the Americans sent squadron after squadron of torpedo bombers to their pointless deaths. And that's represented by those units having extremely poor combat values. Basically, they have the lowest you can get while still being quote-unquote effective. At the same time, the Japanese, when they are, you go on the attack priority chart, they are prioritizing attacking those torpedo bombers, just like they did in real life. Despite the poor results the torpedo bombers had, or maybe because of it, it just fits historically, And that's an example of the game simulating history for both the positive and the negative for both sides. One minor exception is unit ranges. There are some unrealistic unit ranges, such as, aircraft carrier launch Japanese Zero technically has a range to fly from Wake Island to Midway. Historically, not accurate. Finally, for my last pro, the sequence of play, it's clear. It's long, but it's very clear procedural. It's a full game turn. It starts when you draw an operations marker. From there, it breaks down into Japanese and American phases, and within each of those phases are the different segments. Segment to segment, phase to phase, what the Japanese will be doing and what your available actions are. That's a nice change from some solitaire games, some games that claim to be solitaire games, that would have really vague rules for the AI. All right, I think that's enough for my pros and cons. Let's wrap up with the final thoughts. All right, does Midway Solitaire perfectly simulate the tempo of the war in the Pacific in early to mid-1942? No, it does not, for the reasons I've already described. However, does the game give you, at least give you a taste, a feel of that critical juncture during the war? I believe it does. In hindsight, we know the realities of men and material advantages the Allies, specifically the United States, had against Japan. At the time this game took place, the U.S. had already had 13 Essex-class aircraft carriers under construction. The Japanese had one fleet carrier being constructed. And that's just one of 1,000 examples. But look back to early 1942. Try to put yourself in the shoes of Ernest King, Admiral Nimitz, Spruance, the leaders of Australia. Think about how the Japanese had been rampaging virtually unchecked across the Pacific. What good do those future war machines matter when the lines of communication and supply to Australia are being threatened? That an invasion of Hawaii was actually feared. That we were putting up inferior planes and equipment versus superior Japanese equipment with more experienced pilots. In that sense, the game does a great job of putting you on the spot to try and hold back the Japanese who are advancing. They're advancing in the North, the Central Pacific, the South. The game gives the Japanese AI multiple paths to victory. There's not just the VP aspect right at the end of the game. You have multiple paths they're advancing and multiple paths you have to defend. You lose any one of them, comes that sudden death, they get next to a home base, they advance, it's game over for you. As long as you like the scope of this game, which, it's named after Midway, but it covers much more than that single battle. And you don't mind a game that is on the longer side. It takes a long evening or really more realistically a couple days to play it all the way to the end. I can easily recommend Midway Solitaire based on all the reasons I've mentioned already. I just found it to be a fun experience overall. That said, if you expected an excellent tactical game, or you want a perfect simulation of Japanese doctrine, or you really only play lighter, quick-playing games, you'll likely want to pass this one by. For the rest of you, I think once you're comfortable with the rules and the procedural nature of it, you'll be in for a good game. Thanks for watching, guys. If you have anything to say about this game, about my video, my review, any questions for me, comments, please share below. And as always, if you made it this far, throw a like on the video. And if you've watched me for this long, just subscribe already, all right? I sure appreciate it, guys. Until next time, later.